The handcuffs clicked before the grill even cooled. For a few seconds, the sound cut through the backyard like a snapped wire. People who'd come for potato salad and small talk froze mid-bite. A woman in a summer dress, Renee Claiborne, stood with a manila envelope clutched to her chest, eyes wide in a way that briefly looked like surprise, and then, impossibly, like someone rehearsing shock. Behind her, Evan Claiborne, Arthur Keene's eldest son, looked as if the world had gone quiet and left only a shadow where his certainty used to be. Arthur sat a little straighter in his favorite chair beneath the old maple. His hands were steady, but his chest tightened at the thought he had been trying to push away all week, the loss of independence. The house was not wallpaper and floorboards to him. It was Lillian's laugh in the kitchen at dawn, the dent in the stair where a small foot once slipped, the map of a life built one ordinary decision at a time. That was why he'd been so careful. That was why he'd packed a small digital recorder into his shirt pocket that morning. Not because he expected a bust, but because he'd learned that some threats move fastest when no one else is watching. "This is an arrest for suspected elder-exploitation," the agent said, voice flat and official. He placed a small badge on the picnic table like a punctuation mark. People's conversations fell into fragments. A toddler's paper airplane fluttered forgotten to the grass. Mrs. Medina from next door gripped Arthur's cane and held her breath. For months, Renee had fit into the neighborhood the way a guest can. She brought casseroles, complimented Arthur's photos, asked after his garden. But Arthur had noticed things that didn't add up, small slash marks of behavior that felt deliberate. She had an odd little tick. When she lied or coached someone, she smoothed her left sleeve with the pad of her thumb the same way a person might rearrange a hat. It was too specific to be theatrical and too habitual to be innocent. She kept saying the same phrase in different contexts. "Let me take the worry off your plate." And each time it landed with a slightly different emphasis, as if she were testing which inflection worked best. He had watched Renee's visits grow more insistent. Offers to help with paperwork, offhand remarks about upcoming repairs, an affectionate suggestion that Arthur should reduce his responsibilities after his surgery. Evan, busy and trusting, had fallen for the ease of someone who made things seem helpful. Arthur suspected romance had blurred the edges. He suspected his son's kindness had become a wedge. Whatever the reason, Arthur felt the prickle of danger, the fear that the house his wife and he had lived in for 40 years could be moved like a chess piece. So he had prepared quietly. He'd called an old friend, Detective Marcus Hale, who'd once been his courtroom clerk and now worked elder fraud cases, and arranged a small constellation of witnesses for the backyard. Mrs. Medina, his daughter May, and a retired accountant from church. He updated his medical competency letter from Dr. Sadiq, printed key bank summaries, and tucked the recorder into his lapel. He didn't want spectacle. He wanted safeguards. Renee arrived with a professional notary and the manila envelope. She spoke with the soft, practiced cadence of someone used to trust. "We should simplify. It's kinder." The notary clicked open his briefcase, took out a stamp, and smiled the kind of smile that belongs to people who believe rubber meets reality in an instant. Arthur read the first line aloud because the moment demanded it. The paper claimed Arthur lacked the capacity to manage his affairs and handed sweeping authority to Renee in the event of a decline. He felt the neighbors lean in. For a heartbeat, the yard was only sun and a faint, distant hiss of traffic, the world that holds ordinary lives. Then Arthur pressed play. Renee's voice filled the space, clear and clinical, measured instructions about taking control before anyone suspects, offhand descriptions of how to manufacture urgency, a sentence describing the need for quick signatures so it's done before family can interfere. What sounded like a rehearsed cadence in the yard just hours earlier became something harder, an admission. The recorder's file landed like a blow. Marcus stepped forward and placed evidence on the table. The notary's smile thinned. The professional's briefcase seemed suddenly smaller. People murmured, but the hum didn't change the fact the audio had done its most precise work, converting implication into statement. Evan's face folded in on itself then. Shock, shame, confusion braided tightly. He read the yard differently now, some mix of betrayal and the dawning horror that maybe he'd been helped into a lie. Arthur saw that the pain in his son's eyes was not only for the arrest, but for being loved into blindness. It was an arc that would have to be watched and mended later. Renee offered a flurry of excuses that dissolved against the recording. Her practiced phrases, protecting him, "You can't see how he's changed," sounded like props. Marcus moved with procedural calm, read rights, and began taking statements. The neighbors clustered with an intimacy that is reserved for shared shock. Tommy, May's little boy, pointed and said with a child's simple authority, "She was mean." The verdict was, for him, immediate. After the agents led Renee away, Arthur stayed seated a moment longer than the rest. He felt the odd cocktail of fatigue and relief. He had blocked an immediate theft, but the day had delivered a cost he hadn't counted. He lifted his hand. It trembled, very slightly, and smoothed his napkin as if that small motion could hush the disquiet. The recorder went into Marcus's hands, and Arthur made a quiet list on a legal pad. Call the bank, contact the attorney, tell the neighbors what to watch for. Tomorrow, he knew, would be about repair and explanation, about stitching back what had been pulled apart. Tonight he listened to the maple leaves and let the small sound remind him why he had acted, not for headlines, but for the soft accumulation of ordinary days he'd shared with Lillian. The shock of the arrest still hung over the backyard like smoke drifting low to the ground. Only after a long, stunned moment did people begin to move again, slowly, cautiously, as if afraid any sudden motion might shatter whatever truth had just been exposed. Plates sat abandoned on lawn chairs. The grill hissed to itself. Voices dropped into small, hesitant clusters, the kind born when certainty has been replaced by disbelief. Arthur Keene rose carefully, feeling the ache in his knees and something deeper in his chest. Not pain, but a bruising humiliation, being targeted inside his own home. Losing Lillian was one kind of grief, but losing the authority to protect the life they'd built felt like a threat to the very core of who he was. The yard he surveyed was the same one where Lillian used to host Sunday teas. The same place where Evan had once practiced Little League swings and where May had learned to braid her doll's hair. Now it had become a crime scene wearing the clothes of a holiday gathering. Detective Marcus Hale approached, voice low and steady. "We'll get everything processed. When you're ready, I'll need your statement." Arthur nodded, though a flicker of unsteadiness brushed him. A memory of hospital monitors and the fear that recovery had made him more invisible than he realized. But seeing the agents, the neighbors, the shock on his children's faces sparked something else too. A quiet return of backbone, the old judicial steel rising to the surface. May stepped beside him, Tommy hiding behind her leg. "Dad," she whispered. "I knew she was pushy, but this?" Arthur squeezed her shoulder gently. Predators don't start by grabbing. They start by nudging. A truth he knew too well. A truth Renee had weaponized expertly. She had begun with softness, complimenting his garden, insisting she adored Lillian's portrait, offering to run errands. Then came the subtle reframing. "You must be so tired managing this place alone. I can take the worry off your plate." And always smoothing her left sleeve with her thumb whenever she said something untrue. A tiny gesture Arthur recognized only in hindsight. Boundaries shift in small increments first. It wasn't the forged papers that alarmed him initially. It was the day she straightened one of Lillian's framed photos by half an inch without being asked. A tiny intrusion. A test balloon. And Arthur had felt something cold settle in his spine, even then. Evan stood near the fence now, shoulders hunched, staring at the ground as if the grass might offer an explanation. When Arthur approached him, he didn't lift his head. "She always said you were trying to do too much," Evan murmured. "She made it seem like she cared, like she wanted to help you and me." There it was, the specific hook Renee had used. She'd fed his quiet fear, that Arthur was slipping away from him, that another medical scare would come, that he would lose his father without having protected him. "She told me," Evan added shakily, "that if I didn't step up, I'd regret it for the rest of my life." Arthur took a slow breath. "She exploited your worry, Evan, not your weakness." But Evan's face told the truth. He felt complicit, manipulated, ashamed. And repairing that fracture would take longer than any court case. Across the yard, Marcus conferred with his team. Arthur caught fragments, tones more than words. One agent held a folder, another photographed the stamped pages. The notary, who had arrived with stiff politeness, now kept wiping his palms on his slacks and avoiding eye contact. Arthur recognized the look. A man who realized too late the job he'd taken wasn't as harmless as advertised. Marcus returned with a calmer summary, spacing the facts deliberately. Some signatures don't match yours. We'll verify, but it's already clear they were preparing a transfer. And these emergency directives, they weren't drafted by any legitimate firm in the area. Arthur nodded. He had suspected as much. Predators escalate once they believe the boundaries they've tested will hold. Neighbors began drifting closer again, tentative but invested. Mrs. Medina shook her head sharply. Next month I'm teaching everyone how to spot scams. I'm tired of pretending this stuff only happens on the news. A few people laughed, half relief, half shock. But underneath, the truth was dawning. If Arthur Keene, sharp as ever, could be targeted, anyone could. May crossed her arms, jaw tight. Arthur saw something flicker behind her anger. A private guilt that she hadn't noticed Renee's encroachment sooner. A small shame tucked under her fury. He touched her elbow. Deceit thrives in silence, sweetheart. It's not your failure. As agents packed up evidence and neighbors trickled away, Arthur gathered stray plates from the tables. His hand wavered once before he steadied it. May pretended not to notice. It was the kindest choice she could have made. You okay? She asked softly. Arthur glanced toward Marcus's vehicle, where the recorder now sat sealed in an evidence bag. Today stopped her plan, he said, voice low but firm. But stopping a plan isn't the same as understanding its reach. The words tasted heavy. True. When the last guest departed and the yard went quiet, Arthur walked to the side gate. He closed it slowly, listening to the soft metallic click of the latch, sharp, final, almost too loud in the cooling evening air. A breeze shivered the maple leaves overhead. He felt the weight of all that had almost been taken. The arrest was the reveal. Tomorrow would be the reckoning. The morning after the arrest arrived muted, thick with the scent of last night's cooling charcoal drifting through the open kitchen window. Arthur Keene sat at his table, fingers curled around a mug of oversteeped tea he hadn't realized he'd let sit too long. A faint tremor rippled through his hand. Not fear, he told himself, but the residue of a night spent thinking too much and sleeping too little. Outside, the maple cast a warped, early-morning shadow across the grass, as if the tree itself was unsure where the light belonged. A sharp knock broke the stillness. When Arthur opened the door, Detective Marcus Hale stood there with the same badge, the same stoic calm, but softer eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of yesterday's chaos. He hesitated half a second before speaking, a flicker of human fatigue showing through the professional exterior. Morning, Arthur, he said. Mind if I come in? Arthur nodded and stepped aside. Marcus set a slim folder on the table, but didn't open it right away. That pause, that breath, told Arthur the truth had weight. We've processed the first round of evidence, Marcus said at last, easing the folder open as though revealing something fragile. Arthur braced himself. Inside the folder lay the first pieces of an uglier puzzle. A transfer deed naming Lioncrest Holdings LLC as the future owner of Arthur's home. A forged capacity form diagnosing him with cognitive diminishment. A handwritten timeline from Renee, crisp, neat, outlining when to apply pressure, when to fabricate urgency, when to isolate. A cold, focused anger tightened in Arthur's stomach. Seeing her handwriting again, neat loops, overly tidy lines, twisted something deep inside him. This wasn't improvisation. This was architecture. Marcus continued. We also found emails to a burner account. Whoever she worked with coached her on timing and strategy. Arthur stiffened. She wasn't working alone. No, Marcus said gently. We believe at least 2 others are involved. And Arthur, he paused. They've targeted seniors across 3 counties. The room felt smaller suddenly. Arthur's breath came slow and deliberate, the old judicial instinct waking beneath the shock. Renee's duplicity wasn't personal misfortune, it was systemic. Preyed upon vulnerability, repeated methodically. He steadied himself with a hand on the table. Show me everything, he said, voice composed but edged. Marcus slid over another sheet, a USB drive. Your recording matched phrasing from 2 prior investigations. Same script, same grooming patterns. Arthur felt a flash, not of fear, but of righteous purpose. Boundaries shift in small increments first. He'd seen it. He'd lived it. And now he understood the scale. The next knock was softer. Uncertain. Evans stepped in, eyes red-rimmed, shoulders hunched as though trying to make himself smaller. He glanced at Marcus and then at the documents on the table. His jaw tightened. "Dad, did she really plan all this?" he whispered. Arthur nodded slowly. Evan collapsed into a chair, hands clasped behind his neck. "She told me you'd been forgetting things," he admitted. "She said you were scared to tell us you were slipping. She said she just wanted to help before something bad happened." And there it was, the specific lie. The wedge she'd driven into his son. Arthur's chest tightened, not from anger, but from heartbreak. She hadn't just groomed him. She'd weaponized his deepest fear. "Evan," Arthur said gently, "your fear wasn't the weakness. Her manipulation was the weapon." Across the room, Marcus subtly looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. A small, involuntary wince at witnessing a private wound. Not the polished detachment of a detective, but a human reaction to a son unraveling. Evan swallowed hard. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought," she made me believe. Arthur rested a hand on his shoulder. "She shifted your boundaries the same way she tried to shift mine. Piece by piece." The words landed heavy, a truth both men would need time to absorb. When Evan stepped outside for air, Marcus's tone changed. "Arthur, we're pursuing warrants for 2 more people. One drafts the documents. The other scouts neighborhoods for vulnerable targets." He placed another page on the table, a simple diagram of names, burner emails, and movement patterns. A spider's web with Renee as one threaded point. "This could be the strongest case we've gotten," Marcus said. "Your evidence gives us leverage we've never had." Arthur nodded slowly, feeling the shift inside him. The judge rising, steady and analytical. "Tell me what you need." "Every detail," Marcus said. "Every small shift in her behavior, every red flag, even if you think it's insignificant." Arthur's expression sharpened. "Small things matter to people like her. They're how predators measure what they can get away with." Marcus nodded. "Exactly." May burst through the door mid-morning, her hair pulled back, worry etched into her brow. She stopped short at the sight of the documents. Her face hardened, then cracked. "I should have seen this," she whispered. "I should have protected you, Dad." Arthur shook his head gently. "Deception thrives on trust. That isn't your failure." But May's eyes flinched, a small crack of self-doubt. She wasn't just angry at Renee. She was angry at herself for not noticing the shifting boundaries sooner. Her protective instinct had teeth now, the kind that would bite if anyone tried this again. Marcus spread the final diagram across the table. "Your case might be the key to dismantling the ring." Arthur studied it, not with fear, but with clarity. The clarity of a man who had spent a lifetime weighing truth. A man who understood that the threat to his home wasn't an isolated wound. It was part of a much larger illness. "What happens now?" Arthur asked. "We build the case," Marcus said. "And Arthur, once this gets moving, it may get messy." Arthur straightened, pain and purpose entwined. "Messy doesn't scare me." When the house finally quieted and both Marcus and Evan had gone, Arthur stepped onto the porch. A breeze caught the maple's branches, and one leaf, too early for the season, spiraled down, landing at his feet. He bent slowly, picked it up, and held it between finger and thumb. A boundary shifted once. It would not shift again without his consent. He lifted his chin toward the wind, feeling the first hint of a storm gathering, and the steadiness of a man preparing to meet it head-on. By the next afternoon, Willow Bend felt subtly altered, as if the neighborhood had exhaled but never fully inhaled again. Conversations paused when Arthur Keene stepped outside. Curtains shifted. Mailboxes that were usually visited casually were now approached in pairs, neighbors glancing around as though the soil beneath their routines had been disturbed. Arthur felt it too, that invisible recalibration of how others now saw him. Vulnerable. The word from the news headline still pulsed unpleasantly under his skin like a bruise. Earlier, as he stood in the kitchen slicing an apple, he caught himself gripping the knife too tightly. The humiliation flickered up first, remembering who he had been, the authority he held in a courtroom, the way people once waited for his interpretation of the law. Now they whispered about his fragility. Beneath that shame lived anger. A quiet, sharp-edged anger that someone had turned his independence into a narrative. And beneath that, an unwelcome, private fear. Will the world treat me differently now? Will they speak around me instead of to me? Would Lillian hate this? Lillian's house was supposed to be his fortress. Now it felt like a stage where strangers defined him. A knock at the back door pulled him from his thoughts. May stepped inside holding her phone, expression tense. Dad, the news outlets picked it up. Arthur took the phone. The headline glared back. Local senior nearly defrauded. Human interest story highlights community concern. Senior. Defrauded. Concern. Each word landed like a separate insult. I'm not helpless, Arthur muttered, jaw tight. May touched his arm gently. I know that. But the public doesn't. He felt something twist sharply inside. Pride wounded, identity threatened. He handed the phone back, not trusting himself to say more without sounding defensive. When Arthur went outside later for fresh air, the tension in the neighborhood's surface became even clearer. Several neighbors hovered near their mailboxes, talking in low tones. When they noticed him approaching, they shifted awkwardly, offering a warmth that was trying too hard. Mrs. Medina marched up first with a casserole dish. Arthur, sweetheart, if you ever need someone to check in on you at night, just call me. The comment landed wrong, well-meaning, but patronizing. Before Arthur could respond, another neighbor, Mrs. Teller, chimed in softly to May instead of to him. Poor man. This all must be so confusing for him. Arthur stiffened, talking about him while he stood right there. A small boundary shift, but still a shift. He gave a brief nod. I'm perfectly capable of understanding what's happening. Thank you. Mrs. Teller flushed and retreated. The others fell silent. Mr. Patel approached next, more tactful. Arthur, if you need a second set of eyes on any paperwork, I'm available. This, at least, came with respect, not pity. Arthur thanked him, but as he walked back home, he felt the subtle pull of something he despised. People treating him like a fragile man whose decisions needed supervision. Another boundary shifting, and not in his favor. Late afternoon light spilled across the living room when Michael arrived, hat in hand. He stepped inside, shoulders sagging, refusing to meet Arthur's eyes. Dad, he said quietly, we need to talk. They sat side by side on the couch Lillian had insisted they buy, a detail that suddenly felt unbearably tender. Michael inhaled shakily. She told me you were struggling, that you'd mixed up your meds last month. He swallowed hard. Remember when she moved your pill organizer and said she was fixing the system? I thought she was being helpful, but now I see she was staging something. A chill slid through Arthur. He remembered that day, how Renee had insisted the organizer was confusing, how she had moved the bottles to make it simpler. A small shift, a test, a counterfeit moment to frame him as dependent. Michael's voice broke. She also told me you'd nearly tripped on the back steps. She made it sound like you were hiding it from us. That never happened, Arthur said flatly. I know that now. Michael scrubbed a hand over his face. But she played my fears. Made me think if I questioned her, I wasn't being a good son. Arthur's chest tightened at the quiet confession of guilt. You were manipulated, Michael. Just like I was. Boundaries shift slowly before anyone sees them moving. Michael nodded, breath unsteady. I'm filing for divorce. Saying it cost him. Arthur could see the pain, not just heartbreak, but humiliation, the collapse of trust, the realization he'd built intimacy on lies. Arthur placed a steady hand on his back. You'll get through this. Michael nodded again, tears bright but unshed. I hope so, Dad. I really do. Evening approached when Detective Marcus Hale stepped up to the porch, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, exhaustion lining the corners of his eyes. He carried a folder, but his expression carried something heavier. We found something, he said without small talk, and it changes the stakes. Arthur tensed. What is it? Marcus opened the folder just enough for Arthur to see the transcript. Renee made a call 2 days before the barbecue. Shortly after that call, someone in her network tried to access your insurance portal. Arthur's pulse hit a harder rhythm. Meaning what? Marcus lowered his voice. It means they were moving fast, and they may still be. Someone tried to ping her burner number this morning after news of the arrest broke. A ripple of unease passed through Arthur. They're still out there. Yes, Marcus said soberly. And networks like this, they move quickly when cornered. Your cooperation puts you on their radar. Arthur held Marcus's gaze. Fear threaded through his spine, thin but unmistakably real. But layered beneath that fear was anger, a steadying force. Then we make this count, Arthur said. Marcus nodded. With your testimony and the evidence, this could become one of the biggest takedowns in the region. After Marcus left, May hovered by the counter, arms crossed, jaw set. But something in her eyes was no longer guilt, It was resolve. "Dad," she said, "I'm not going to let anyone blindside us again. I already started something." She held up her laptop. "I created a shared secure folder for all your legal documents. Password protected. I also registered us for a fraud prevention workshop downtown. And I drafted a neighborhood bulletin for signs of elder targeting scams. Concrete steps. Real action. A shift not of fear, but of empowerment." Arthur felt something inside soften. "May, thank you. I'm not doing this because I feel guilty anymore," she said. "I'm doing it because we're a team." That night, Arthur stepped onto the porch. A faint breeze rustled the maple's branches. One brittle branch, thin from the last early storm, cracked, splintering quietly before falling to the grass. Arthur bent, picked it up, and felt its weakness between his fingers. A reminder that even the strongest things fracture when pressure is applied slowly, imperceptibly. But a fallen branch wasn't a fallen tree. Arthur straightened, the cool night air brushing his face. Fear still lived in his chest, but beside it now burned something steadier. Resolve. Clarity. Fight. The network had underestimated him once. They would not do it again. 2 days after Marcus's warning, Arthur sat at the dining table, rereading documents with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a man forcing himself to stay composed. His glasses rested low on his nose, and every so often his eyes drifted from the pages to the maple tree outside, its branches steady, though he could almost imagine them bending under unseen pressure. He traced one line of Renee's timeline with his thumb. "Introduce urgency." The words made his stomach clench. He remembered the exact moment she'd invoked that tactic. The faint patronizing tilt of her voice, the sleeve-smoothing tick, the suggestion that things were getting too complicated for him. He felt the humiliation again, that others now viewed him as vulnerable, followed by a flash of anger, and then a quieter, more private fear. What if, under pressure, I forget something? What if the courtroom I once commanded now sees only a diminished man? He hadn't admitted that fear out loud. Not yet. A knock sounded at the door. May stepped in carrying her own folder. Her face was composed, but her eyes carried a thin thread of worry. "Marcus wants to meet before the preliminary hearing," she said. He sounded urgent. There it was again, urgency. A different kind this time, but still enough to wake Arthur's pulse. Marcus arrived an hour later with 3 bulging binders. He set them down heavily, then rubbed his forehead, a small, unguarded gesture Arthur hadn't seen before. "All right," Marcus said, taking a seat. "We need to talk strategy." Arthur straightened, but a flicker of doubt tightened his chest. He inhaled slowly, pushing forward. "How involved will my testimony be?" he asked. Marcus opened the first binder, financials, timelines, names. "Very involved. Your recording is our anchor, but the DA wants to establish a pattern. We've connected Renee to 5 other cases. Same emotional grooming sequence. Same boundary shifts." May looked at Arthur sharply when Marcus said boundary shifts. She caught the phrase, its weight, and instinctively moved a little closer to her father, protective without saying a word. Marcus flipped another page. "And there's more. Someone tried to access your property records this morning from a public library terminal." Arthur felt a cold tightening in his chest. Not panic, something sharper. "They're watching me." "Likely," Marcus admitted. He lowered his voice. "And to be honest, Arthur, this network is more organized than we expected. They move fast when spooked. I don't like how active they still are." It was the first crack in Marcus's usual confidence. May immediately tensed, fear flashing openly in her eyes. "What does this mean for him?" she asked. Marcus exhaled. "It means the best protection is visibility. Vulnerable people hide. Strong witnesses stand in the open." Arthur absorbed that. The thought of testifying, putting his competence on display, stirred the old terror. What if I falter? What if they see weakness? But then he looked at his daughter, and at the binders, and at the recorder resting quietly on the table, that small device that had saved him. He straightened. "What does the deposition entail?" Marcus hesitated. "Opposing counsel will try to unsettle you. They may imply you misunderstood. They'll test your memory. They'll question your judgment. They want the jury to doubt your clarity." Arthur swallowed, the fear real, undeniable, and then felt the judge in him rise beneath it, steady and familiar like a forgotten muscle finding strength. "And what do you need from me?" he asked. Marcus gave a tired smile. "Exactly what you just showed. Balance. Resolve. There was a beat, a shared moment between the three of them. Then Arthur said, calmly, "If they try to silence me, I'll speak louder." Marcus nodded once, deeply. Good. After Marcus left, Arthur stood at the window. The maple tree swayed lightly in the dusk, shadows stretching across the yard. For a moment, everything seemed still. Then he noticed it, a dark sedan idling half a block down. Not moving, not parking, just lingering. May joined him at the window. "Do you know that car?" "No," Arthur said quietly. The engine rumbled faintly, an animal growling from a distance. The network wasn't gone. It was watching. And Arthur Keene, once underestimated, was now stepping into the light, fully aware of the eyes on him. The morning of Arthur's pre-hearing preparation felt unnervingly still, the kind of quiet that made the house sound older than it was. He sat at the dining table, now a battlefield of binders, legal pads, and highlighted timelines, trying to steady his thoughts. May moved around the kitchen with a jittery energy, filling her mug, forgetting she'd already poured one. "You don't need to memorize every detail," she said, trying to reassure him. "You live this." Arthur nodded, but his eyes drifted to the recorder sitting on the table, the same device that had captured Renee's voice, the same object that had preserved his truth. He drew strength from it, until suddenly he didn't. As he reached to turn a page, his hand trembled, subtle, but enough for the paper to slip from his fingers and flutter onto the floor. May froze. Arthur did too. It was the first time she'd seen the crack, the tiny break in composure he'd fought to hide. He cleared his throat. Just tired. May knelt to retrieve the paper, but her eyes lingered on his shaking hand. A softness and a fear crossed her expression before she masked it again. A knock broke the uneasy air. A courier stood on the porch holding a thick envelope. Delivery for Arthur Keene. From Hartman and Lowe, Renee's legal team. Arthur carried it to the table. May hovered, lips pressed tight. When he opened it, the tone of the letter hit first. Cold, strategic, curated to wound. "We intend to challenge Mr. Keene's cognitive clarity. We request all documentation regarding episodes of confusion, medication adjustments, or memory lapses. His recent medical history raises concern regarding reliability of recollection." May snatched the papers from his hand, her fingers shaking with anger. "This is disgusting. They're trying to manufacture weakness." Arthur swallowed hard as a single memory flashed. The moment after his surgery when he tried to recall a simple legal term and it had slipped away for several agonizing seconds. He'd told no one. Now the shame pulled at him again. "They're doing what defense attorneys do," he murmured, but his voice wasn't steady. May stepped closer, protective. "They're lying, Dad. Twisting things." Arthur didn't respond, because twisting shadows was exactly the point. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, looking more worn than usual, tie loosened, jaw tight. "I saw the packet," he said. "They're going for the jugular." He flipped through the documents, jaw clenching harder. "This is their whole strategy, not to prove innocence, but to make you look unreliable. They don't need evidence. Just shadows." May frowned. "What do you mean by shadows?" Marcus laid out a grim truth. "Anything. One neighbor who remembers you repeating a story. One day you forgot a phone charger. One doctor's note about post-op fatigue." Arthur felt the cold weight of it. How fragile a reputation could become when someone wanted to fracture it. "And there's more," Marcus added. "The network's second accomplice, the one we believe scoped victims, is identified now." Arthur stiffened. "Who is he?" Marcus opened a file to a grainy photo. A man in his late 30s, narrow face, dark beard, wearing a maintenance uniform. Name Zarin Voss. Poses as a handyman or utility worker. Victims described him as helpful, quiet, always noticing too much. May's breath caught. Someone like that could walk right into anyone's life. "He already has," Marcus said. 2 prior victims reported seeing him outside their homes days before paperwork went missing. Arthur felt his stomach turn. "And now?" he asked. "Gone," Marcus said. "Devices wiped. Apartment cleared. We think he's in the wind, or watching." A silence layered itself over the room. Marcus slid over mock cross-examination sheets. "They'll ask things designed to make you question yourself," he warned. Arthur scanned the first page. "Mr. Keene, isn't it possible you misunderstood Renee's intentions? Isn't it true you were recovering from a surgery at the time? Did you perhaps imagine urgency where none existed?" His chest tightened. That last question echoed something Renee had said months ago when he'd voiced a concern. Arthur, you're overthinking. You're imagining problems. May noticed his stillness and touched his arm. Hey, you know the truth. Arthur nodded, but the echo stung. Marcus leaned forward. They will provoke you. Don't defend your pride. Answer with clarity, not emotion. They want you to falter. May gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. He's not alone in this. Marcus gave her a sympathetic glance, seeing her fear, her determination, the fact she wanted desperately to protect a man she couldn't shield in a courtroom. The defense has filed a motion to delay the preliminary hearing, Marcus added. Arthur frowned. Why? So they have more time to build shadows, Marcus said grimly. And more time for Voss to move. Arthur inhaled, slow and deliberate. His confidence wasn't whole, but it was rebuilding, piece by determined piece. Then we stay ahead of them, he said. Marcus nodded, relief flickering in his eyes, his own cracks showing for a second. Good. Because cases like this, they slip through fingers. I've lost too many. May reached for Arthur's hand, her fear palpable, but her resolve stronger. That evening, Arthur glanced out the window. The same dark sedan idled half a block down. But this time, a faint orange glow flickered, the ember of a cigarette. A silhouette leaned forward slightly, watching the house. The maple's branches swayed, fractured shadows rippling across the yard. Arthur stepped closer to the window, drawing the curtain aside. No trembling this time. Just defiance. If they wanted to watch him, let them. He was no longer hiding from anyone. The morning of Arthur's deposition arrived under a sky the color of tarnished steel. The courthouse annex sat tucked behind the main building, a place Arthur had entered thousands of times as a judge, but today felt foreign, smaller, colder, as if the walls no longer remembered him. As he buttoned his sleeve in the hallway, his fingers fumbled the clasp. A tremor, slight but unmistakable, ran through his hand. He closed his eyes. Not now. May noticed. She said nothing, but her expression pinched, worry softening the corners of her mouth. You don't have to be perfect, she murmured. Just honest. Arthur nodded, though a quiet fear rattled in his ribs. He used to stride these halls with unshakable certainty. Today, he caught himself glancing at a brass wall plaque listing retired judges, his own name among them, and wondered whether the building remembered him more clearly than he remembered himself. Marcus met them by the deposition door. He looked stern, protective, but frayed. They're going to push you, he said. Hard. Arthur's throat tightened. I'm ready. Marcus hesitated. Just remember, they want you rattled. The moment you look uncertain, they'll press. May tensed. Arthur placed a gentle hand on her arm, reassuring her more than himself. The door opened. Hartman stepped out, tall, polished, predatory. Mr. Keene, he said mildly, thank you for accommodating our schedule. I know mornings can be challenging at your stage of recovery. A flash of heat surged up Arthur's neck. May stiffened. Marcus's jaw flexed. Arthur forced a steady tone. I'm managing quite well. Hartman smiled without warmth. Let's hope that continues. The deposition chamber was too bright, white lights buzzing faintly overhead, the table reflecting every emotion too clearly. Arthur's hand brushed the small recorder Marcus had loaned him, the familiar weight grounding him. It was the same model he'd used months ago, the one that saved him. The court reporter lifted her hands. Hartman pressed record. Mr. Keene, he began, voice smooth as lacquer. You allege Ms. Claiborne exerted coercive influence. Can you explain why a competent adult would come so close to signing over his home? Arthur inhaled. Because she presented urgency and misrepresented the nature of the documents. Hartman leaned back. Interesting. And you didn't question her intent. I questioned her repeatedly, Arthur replied. Hartman nodded, as if humoring him. And yet you proceeded. I proceeded with caution, Arthur clarified. Hartman flipped a page, gaze sharpening. Your medical history indicates reduced cognitive resilience following surgery. Would you say your clarity was compromised? The room tightened. Arthur felt his chest constrict. Then Hartman added, softly, maybe you misunderstood. The phrase cut straight through him. Maybe you misunderstood, Arthur. You're imagining problems. You misinterpreted my help. Renee's voice echoed through his mind like a crack in the wall. Arthur froze. Only for a second, but long enough for Hartman to taste the hesitation. May dug her nails into her bag. Marcus leaned forward, lips parting as if about to intervene, then stopping, powerless. Hartman pounced. "Let me rephrase," he said smoothly, employing a classic trap. "At any point, did you misplace documents? Repeat questions? Forget details? Because confusion at your age isn't unusual." Arthur swallowed, throat dry. His breath hitched. A small, visible break. Hartman repeated another earlier question, differently worded, testing Arthur's memory. Then another, and another, each one designed to make him contradict himself or scramble for footing. Arthur steadied his hands on the table. "No," he said, voice trembling once before leveling out. "I did not misunderstand. I recognized manipulation. That's why I documented it." Hartman's eyes narrowed. Just as Hartman opened his mouth to strike again, his associate leaned in, whispering urgently. The man's face had gone pale, his hand shaking slightly as he slid a paper toward Hartman. Hartman read it. His expression darkened, then smoothed over, too quickly. He closed his binder without finishing his notes. "That will be all for now," he said abruptly. "We reserve the right to reconvene." Marcus blinked. May frowned. Something had changed, sharply, unexpectedly. Hartman stood, but not with his earlier confidence. He checked his phone, jaw tightening before he masked it with a calm veneer. As he left, he paused by Arthur. "A word of caution," he murmured. "Cases like this can become unpredictable." A threat disguised as paternal concern. Outside, clouds had thickened, dimming the street. Arthur and May headed toward Marcus's car when Marcus's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then stopped mid-step. "Arthur," he said quietly, "we have a problem." Arthur followed his gaze. On the corner stood a man in a maintenance uniform, narrow face, dark beard, posture still as a stone marker. Aaron Voss. The same uniform style Arthur remembered from the utility inspector Renee once insisted needed access to the basement. A callback he now understood too late. Voss's eyes locked onto Arthur's. He gave a small, deliberate nod. The same gesture Renee had once given when she believed she had gained his trust. Then he stepped behind a passing truck and vanished. Arthur's heartbeat didn't quicken this time. It steadied into something colder, clearer. This isn't about documents anymore, he realized. They're measuring my resolve. And he was done being misread. Marcus's call came early, slicing through the quiet of Arthur's kitchen like a warning bell. "Arthur," he said without preamble. Voss flipped. "Voluntarily. And he's given us enough to bring the entire ring down." Arthur blinked. Why would he? "Because Renee's arrest made the network unstable," Marcus said tersely. "And Voss has survived 3 rings collapsing before. He knows exactly when to jump ship, and when he's about to be sacrificed." That single line reframed everything. Voss wasn't acting out of conscience. He was acting out of survival. Arthur felt the tension shift inside him like a door unlocking. "Get ready," Marcus added. "We're moving now." By the time Marcus arrived to pick them up, the full picture had formed. Inside the envelope Voss submitted were shell company ledgers, internal handoff schedules, recordings of instructions from handlers, a list of targets, Arthur's name underlined twice, and, damningly, evidence of payments to Hartman's junior associate. May scanned the documents, breath catching. He was going to pin the whole thing on Dad, and then on Voss. Marcus nodded grimly. Exactly, and Voss realized he was the next pawn to be wiped. It wasn't redemption. It was ruthlessly strategic, and that made it believable. When they arrived, the courthouse steps buzzed with reporters. Hartman stood stone-faced at the center of the storm, his associate nowhere in sight. Flashbulbs popped. Microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Hartman, did your office tamper with evidence? Were you aware of payments from the Claiborne network?" Hartman didn't respond, but his shoulders hunched ever so slightly, the first hint that the scaffolding beneath him had cracked. Inside the pre-hearing chamber, the air felt dense, expectant. Renee sat at the defense table, wrists cuffed. Her posture still carried that old poise, but her fingers trembled around her pen. When Arthur entered, her gaze darted to him, not with confidence, but with a quick, searching panic, as if she were looking for the script she once controlled. The judge, a woman Arthur had served alongside for years, entered with slow authority. A hush fell over the room. She surveyed the defense table with a disappointment so palpable it felt like gravity shifting. "We have much to address today," she said, voice measured but razor-edged. The DA stood. "Your Honor," The state has received whistleblower evidence connecting Ms. Claiborne to a multi-county exploitation network. Additionally, this evidence shows that a member of Mr. Hartman's legal team participated in document suppression and fraudulent advisement. A rumble swept through the room. Whispers, gasps, the scrape of shoes against tile. The judge lifted a hand for silence. She turned her gaze to Hartman with the weight of decades of jurisprudence behind it. "Counsel," she said slowly, "the court expects your team to act with integrity. I trust you understand the severity of what's been presented." Hartman swallowed hard. His associate, standing in the far corner, stared at the floor, unable to meet his eyes. The judge let that moment breathe. Let humiliation settle where arrogance once sat. Then she turned to Renee. "Ms. Claiborne, given this new evidence, the court is considering enhanced charges for coordinated fraud, elder-exploitation, and conspiracy." Renee's breath hitched. Her eyes flickered toward the gallery, as if searching for an exit that no longer existed. Her composure, once her armor, fractured. "Mr. Keene," the judge said gently, "the court will hear from you." Arthur rose. For a moment, as he approached the podium, he felt the familiar trembling in his hand, but he placed it firmly against the wood, grounding himself. "My entire career," he began, voice steady, "I believed I understood human nature. I believed I could see through falsehood. But this case taught me that manipulation rarely announces itself." His gaze swept the room. Boundaries shift in inches, not leaps. A voice that reassures. A suggestion that sounds helpful. A moment where someone tells you you're imagining the very thing you're seeing. His voice wavered, just once, as Lillian's memory brushed through him like a shadow. He steadied himself. "I feared losing my home. But what terrified me more was losing my judgment. My autonomy. The parts of myself that age should refine, not erase." May pressed a hand to her mouth, tears brightening her eyes. "And yet," Arthur continued, stronger now, "I refused to let someone else write a story about my decline. I chose to record her. I chose to stand here. And I choose, today, to speak for those who may not find their voice in time." The courtroom held its breath. The judge nodded, deeply, respectfully. "Thank you, Mr. Keene. Your clarity speaks for itself." By mid-afternoon, Renee was denied bail. The DA filed expanded charges. Voss entered protective custody and provided a full affidavit. Hartman's associate was arrested. Additional accomplices were located through frozen shares in a shell nonprofit. Marcus let out a long, shaky breath, months of tension leaving him at once. May wept quietly. A reporter whispered to another, "This case is going to change everything." That evening, Arthur stood beneath the maple tree. The brittle branch he had noticed days earlier lay fully detached now. He lifted it, examining the fracture. "This isn't decay," he murmured. "It's pruning. The weak pieces falling away so the stronger parts could grow." May joined him. "So what now?" Arthur looked toward the horizon, not fearful, but open. "Marcus mentioned there's a statewide hearing next month," he said. "They need witnesses who can explain how exploitation begins. I think I may have something to say." May smiled through her tears. "I think you do." Arthur set the snapped branch aside. He was no longer defined by vulnerability, or by survival, or by what nearly happened. He was defined by what he chose next. A man who reclaimed his agency. A man who refused to be diminished. A man still, and newly, standing.